Welcome to the Santa Cruz Coffee Break. If you're watching on YouTube or listening on Apple Podcast, please follow, hit the like button, or any subscribes. It really helps us with the algorithms. Santa Cruz Coffee Break is produced by the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum. All opinions are those of the speakers. We invite you to join us on the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum at SCGCPF for more fun. Now, let's get on with this installment of Santa Cruz Coffee Break. We'd like to welcome everybody to the 88th podcast of the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum. And we have a pretty special treat today. We have Teja, Gerken, and Doug Young, and they're going to talk about a lot of stuff, but mostly we're going to talk about a new record that they have coming out very, very, very soon. It'll probably be a couple days after this podcast posts. And welcome in, guys.
Hi. Thank you. Thanks for having us.
I think we need to be careful. It's not a record.
So
okay.
So yes, should I address this? So we put out a new album, this being 2025, and it's actually out, so people can listen to it anytime, and it's on all the streaming services, and it's a streaming release only this time around, and we can talk about why that is. But it's called The Water Is Wide, and it's the second album that Doug and I put out. The first one was called Duets, and I guess technically it was a record. It was a CD at least, so there was a hard copy. This one is a digital release only.
Perfect.
Okay. So how did this come about? Because I think last time, or a time before we talked, we were in the middle of COVID.
Right.
And people had to work. And I always thought that when COVID ended, we were going to have this amazing renaissance of new music, and apparently this is one of them.
Well, Doug and I put out our last album, Duets, very cleverly in March of 2020. So we literally recorded a little promo video and everything in Doug's studio where he's sitting right now, like days before the lockdown. So it was like, I remember driving down there and there was some talk about this weird thing going around and everyone was like washing their hands a lot, but like we weren't wearing masks or anything like that. And literally like the next week, everything shut down and we didn't see each other in person for almost a year. So we had, we were going to play some of the guitar festivals that year. We had a bunch of CD release album things scheduled that, of course, were canceled and everything like that. So we kind of regrouped. I mean, we put the album out and, still did some online promotions and things like that, and got some reviews and eventually started playing. But we sort of regrouped fairly quickly. Fortunately, Doug and I both have home studios. Doug's is much nicer than mine, but mine is functional. And we started to at least, basically to hang out. I mean, you guys might remember both Doug and I hosted these sort of acoustic guitar round robins on Zoom during the pandemic that both Doug and I did. And we started sort of rehearsing together. We started using Jack Trip, which is a way to actually play together in real time over the web, basically. And then eventually started thinking about, well, what other material can we record? Because we have nothing else to do. So you got anything to add to that, Doug?
That's kind of it. We were looking for things we could do while we couldn't go anywhere. So we actually, we spent a lot of time thinking of new material that we could record. And I think the idea, in fact, it kind of shows up with the new album. One of the ideas we had was to try to do some classic tunes. We talked about, how about we just look at a whole bunch of, because the first album was at least half original, some traditional tunes.
Yeah.
But with this one, we actually set out and said, what about all these classic guitar tunes? Could we turn those into duets and do something like that?
Well, and Richard, you asked before we went live about sort of collaborating and things. And we actually started by making a Google Sheet with all the tunes that we thought might be fun. And it was sort of, it was sort of tunes that like there were sort of different categories. There were sort of tunes that one of us was already playing that we thought might be suited for adding a second part. And then there was also sort of a dream list of just tunes that we really liked when like other, there's still a lot of tunes on that list that we haven't
Yes.
gotten to yet.
Yeah. Next album.
Next album, but like other duets, other guitar duos who had done tunes, who were thinking that would be a nice one to do, or that would be a nice one to do. And we just sort of started chipping away. But I think actually, like in our case, it really helped that we had just finished a project. And so we knew how we can work together. And we had sort of come up with I don't want to call it a methodology, but we kind of know how we can arrange tunes together as a duo. And had we not had that before the pandemic, I think it would have been a lot harder to do this project. But I think it really helps to stay organized in some way. So we did create, like I said, a Google Sheet with here's a list of tunes. And it just sort of every time one of us would think of a tune, we would just add it to it. And I haven't looked at it in a while, but there's more than 20 pieces, I think, that are still on there that we haven't gotten to.
Wow. That's then did you work in when you were arranging, did you hook up live and talk about it, or did you kind of take it back and woodshed it and then bring it out?
A little of both, I think. We did these jack trip sessions where we could actually get together and kick around some ideas, and then we'd say, okay, let's go off and play with that idea, and then we'd circle back. There was a lot of sending files back and forth. We both used Logic for recording, so we were actually exchanging entire Logic projects. Teja would record a part, send me the whole thing. I'd send back with an overdub. He'd change his part and send it back to me, and back and forth.
And there were some instances where things changed pretty radically. And I mean, sometimes it can be as easy as starting out with, a little phone recording or phone video and just sort of saying, is there anything here, yay or nay? And sometimes it'll be, I don't think I have anything to add to that. Or it'll be like, great, why don't you spend the time and make a better recording of this?
A great example, actually not on a CD of that, is the project we did with Maurice.
Right.
We had a number of COVID projects that were unrelated to the CD where we collaborated with some other players around the world.
Right. It was really fun.
And you used Jack Tripp for that?
No, Jack Tripp really was, and the Jack Tripp thing really didn't start until a little later in the pandemic, because I think they were developing their whole trip a little bit more. We used Jack Tripp really more as a rehearsal tool for us, and it was almost more like once we started, there was a weird few months where gigs had come back, but you still weren't really hanging out in the same room together if you didn't have to. And so that's kind of when we were using Jack Tripp mostly. Really, for the development of the album, it was mostly sending files back and forth. And it did make the whole process a lot different from how we did duets, because with duets, most of the repertoire came from just basically years of playing gigs together and sort of developing things like that when we get together, and then just basically finally sitting down. Like 2/3 of the material on the first album was tunes that we'd developed playing at gigs and we'd played out, and it was just a matter of getting in the studio and recording it. And duets was also completely, except for one tune where I recorded my part at home, was all done in Doug's studio. And on the new album, there's only one tune that's recorded all in Doug's studio. Everything else is done separately because it started out during COVID and like that. So, Doug, why don't you talk a little bit about these projects we did with others? Because in the context of collaborating, that was really an interesting thing. Mm-hmm. In at least one case, we didn't even know the third guy.
Yes, that's right. We had some people that we had never worked with, and that always adds a wrinkle to the process, but it's fun, have somebody else's approach in there. I thought the one we did with Maurice Tani was really,
fantastic.
Really
we can send you a link to that because people would probably enjoy seeing that.
Yeah,
that was a case where Maurice, who's more of a singer-songwriter type, approached us and said, would you guys put guitar on a piece of mine, and I don't want you to know anything about my style or approach. So what he sent us was a track of him singing the song where he simply strummed the guitar once every measure. So there was no beat, there was no groove, there was nothing to indicate what the feel of the song was supposed to be. And we ended up each putting two guitars. We created a 4-part quartet to back up Maurice's tune. And so we recorded our part, sent it back to him. He added his singing, and that was it. But so it was kind of a back and forth process. I think you added, I think maybe you put down a baritone part first, basically a bass line. And then I started playing around with a fingerstyle accompaniment kind of thing. And then you went back and added a classical. And I thought it still needed something. And I added this little Griffin, little high-tuned 12-string guitar that I have. And
so instead of
spread, big spread of sounds.
So instead of the two of us accompanying Maurice, we turned ourselves into a quartet.
Yeah. And Maurice, I think, was rather shocked by what we came up with because it sounds nothing like the way he actually does the tune, but we, of course, didn't know that.
Yeah, he has a version of the tune that's more of like a country rock band kind of a thing. And we were trying to figure out what to call it. And I think we came up with like urban chamber music or something like that. It was
You didn't get to hear his version of it until after you had completed yours.
Right.
Exactly.
He wouldn't let us hear it. Yeah. He said, I'll let you hear how it's supposed to go later.
Yeah. The other sort of totally remote thing we did was with Charlie Roux and Benjamin Gillet. And Charlie is in New York and Benjamin is in France. And I had done a couple of solo duet things with Charlie. And then it was kind of funny in that I had just discovered Benjamin like on YouTube randomly. He did these, I don't know if you guys are hip to him, but he did these really cool videos of him overdubbing, basically doing 2 videos with a pair of National guitars. And he did some classical piece. I think it might have been Recuerdos de la Alhambra, and he did it on one National playing finger picking, and then on another one playing the melody on a slide. And I was just like, that is so cool. And then somehow, like a week later, Charlie and he had done something together, and I was like, why don't we do something? And I think the first one was just the 3 of us, and then we did another one where we roped Doug in too. So we did a whole bunch of them. And in that case, this is kind of, so many people did these kind of collaborations during the pandemic. In that case, one person has to be the one who lays down the foundation. And in this case, I think it was Benjamin on the first one. Do you remember who did the first one on the quartet one that we did?
The quartet with Benjamin and Charlie. Yeah, I think it was Benjamin's tune. So I think
it was Benjamin's tune, right? So one person would basically put down the main part, and then it's a matter of figuring out how to arrange it. And of course, you have to think about that before the first person puts down the main part, because you need to have room for the solos and stuff. And so we each did our little parts, listened to that, and then I think I put the video together, and Charlie mixed and mastered the audio, and it came out really, really fun. And it was just great to do this multi-global collaboration like that.
I'm not hip to Benjamin, but I'm really hip to Charlie. We've had Charlie on the podcast.
Oh, yeah. Well, you should check out Benjamin, and he'd actually be a fun person to have on the podcast, because he's in France. He's, I think, in Western France, and he is a really fine player, and he's just as much of a guitar nut as anybody. And I'll send you some stuff. And we still haven't met in person, but really a cool guy. And I hope our paths will cross. But so those were sort of, outside of working on the Water is Wide album. In terms of our duets, it just really became that. And actually the first tune we did was Eric Sky's Lock Tender's Real, which I had... again, nothing to do during the pandemic. Sometimes you noodle around, and I'd always liked the tune, of course. And I really liked the first video he did of the tune with Tim Connell on mandolin. Um, and I was in Orkney tuning one day, and I just figured out how to play the A part melody on that. And then I just developed it into an arrangement on solo guitar. Um, and again, I think I did this super early, like the first video I posted during the pandemic, which was me back in my garage studio, and I had rescued a couple of cameras from the Peghead Nation studio, set them back up. It was just more of a test thing. And I have this big baby Taylor that I found in the trash, and it was smashed to bits, and I put it back together. And I just sort of did this video sort of as an example of, okay, here's a guitar that I glued back together from the trash. The video is with an iPhone. I have like all these improvised things, and it came out pretty good. You know, I used like an old curtain for a backdrop. It was totally like, it was probably like April of 2020 or something like that, figuring out how to do things. And then I think, I don't know, Doug, I think maybe you saw that and said I should come up with a second part to that or something like that.
Yeah, we both liked the tune. I think I dabbled with doing a solo arrangement, but never got anywhere with it. But yeah,
Yeah.
adding a second part,
Yeah.
we should show them how those parts fit together. Might be a
We
good
totally
example.
could, yeah. We were actually thinking about that, guys. So, it's a good example of where we're actually in different guitar tunings. I'm in Orkney, Doug's in Dadgad, and you know, our approach to working as a duet really tries to stay away from sort of one guy playing lead, the other playing rhythm kind of a thing. We try to create more of an interlocking kind of a thing when we can. And so with this one, and you know, I'm gonna have to run and get a capo because you talked for a while. Well, I get a capo because I seem to have forgotten to do
You
that.
mentioned
Okay.
for all the
Send you one
guitar
here.
players that Orkney tuning does not involve any pharmaceuticals.
No, Doug, you talk about Orkney and Dadgat and how they
Sure.
relate. Well, I get a capo.
Yeah, you know, Orkney and Daggett are related. Orkney is a term coined by our buddy Steve Boffman. It's actually related to the old banjo sawmill tuning, and Martin Simpson and other people have used it for a long time. But Steve always said that it should be more popular, and he thought one of the reasons was it didn't have a pronounceable name like Dadgad, so he named it Orkney. And but the odd thing is that it's actually very similar to Dadgad. It's just shifted over a string. It's like Dadgad in G, but shifted over a string. They're both suspended tunings, so they don't have, they have a kind of an open, airy Celtic sound. Sounds
Yeah.
like that when you're getting in tune to it.
I'm capoed up.
That was really something that really struck us as we prepared for this today, that you guys really were doing a lot of complementary work versus doing just, you know, playing lead and playing rhythm, you know, and opening up for a solo. It was really complimentary. It's beautiful to listen to.
Well, that's the idea. I mean, for one thing, neither one of us, you know, is like a super chop heavy soloist kind of a person. So we do play solos, and I listen back to the album, and they, you know, we both managed to play some nice solos. But I think ultimately the idea is to create a sound that's where the sum is bigger than the parts, right? You want to really create something that two guitars can do that create this larger, like if there was someone with four hands playing guitar, that's kind of the idea. But so with Lock Tender's Real, so I'm in Orkney, which if I didn't have a capo on would be CGD, GCD, except that I'm capoed up because we're playing it in the same key as Eric is playing. We're playing it in A. So I'm playing the melody kind of on the middle strings, like. That's, you know, that's the A part there. You want to show them what you do over that. We would do it in real time, but it wouldn't work on Zoom. So
Yeah, it wouldn't work on Zoom. But yeah, so he's got, you know, the bass covered and the melody covered. So I'm looking for something I can do to add a little counter melody in the middle and fill it out, kind of orchestral. So I'm doing actually pretty. One of the tricks here with what we do is you have to keep the parts fairly clean and simple, or we're stepping on each other. So I don't want to be too busy. I just want to fill it in. So I play. Which is just a little combination of some moving lines, along with occasionally popping in and harmonizing his melody. And together they hopefully interlock.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's kind of an approach that happens a lot where one of us would sort of have the bones of the tune, sort of, carrying. We do go back and forth with the melody, but usually one of us will have a version that's almost playable as a solo guitar tune. I mean, like if I play Lock Tender as a solo, I basically play the same parts, except there's a solo section that I do if I'm playing it with Doug that I don't do if I'm playing it solo. And there are tunes where, for example, the title tune, The Water is Wide, on the album, is a tune where Doug had an arrangement, and I kind of had to do what Doug just showed us of kind of finding these little spaces where it's not just sort of playing chords behind it, which of course would be the easiest thing to do, but it's not always the most interesting. So finding these little spots to sort of get into where there's room without overdoing it. That's sort of the tricky thing of arranging for a guitar duet.
Well, I think that tricky thing is quite achieved because I think you both listen to each other.
Well, that's it. And in some ways, I mean, doing it the way that we did this album, mostly remotely, in some ways you listen to each other even more because you keep repeating that recording of just that one part, right? Where if you're playing together, you're already kind of doing your own thing. I don't know. I mean, there may be an advantage to doing it this way, actually.
I think it helps because it helps to have recorded this stuff. Like you said, we have two different paths here for some of our tunes. Some things developed over years of playing it live.
Right.
And then we said, let's record it and see what it sounds like.
Right.
Whereas these things we developed in the studio, it was more analytical. You'd listen to the parts and say, is my part clashing there? Maybe I ought to change it,
Right. Yeah.
It is a really unique kind of way of working as to how we worked way back in like 2017 or something like that. But because there's not that immediacy of the feedback of looking at each other and saying,
right.
Okay, I can do this, I can do that. But yet, as you said that, it's like you are listening more.
Yeah.
Because you can really hear the space when you hear the record.
Right. Thank you. Well, and I mean, one thing that I should also add is for people who want to do this kind of remote collaboration, everything we did was with a click track. With the exception, the main reason why we recorded the final tune that's on the album at Doug's place, which is a great tune called Josephine's Waltz, which has kind of become a folk standard. It's written by Roger Tollroth of Vassen, was because we felt that tune needed to breathe and couldn't be locked into the metronome kind of a thing. But everything else we ended up doing with a click. And I think, I mean, it certainly makes it a lot easier to overdub and especially edit the parts later. But I think it also, anytime you work with, I mean, you should work out your tunes with a click no matter whether you record it with it or not, because it really does sort of keep you on track. And I always say, if you can't play a tune to a click, you're not ready to record it. Even if you don't end up recording it with a click. I think just understanding the tune well enough to be rhythmically steady is just paramount to getting something ready to commit to it.
Well, it's especially critical when you do when you're doing remote recording like this. If you're in a room with a band playing and you all got in the groove and it varies a little, that can work. But recording one part then overdubbing, it's pretty tough to follow somebody's timing
Yeah.
It's okay for solo. What I typically do for my solo stuff, and it sounds like you do too, is practice a lot with a metronome, even right before I record. Spend a couple passes through with the metronome, then shut the metronome off and go record. And yeah, my timing won't be perfect, but hopefully I'm still got the right groove in mind. But
I
when we're
don't think
doing that together, it needs to be really locked in.
you can't stress enough practicing with a metronome, and I don't think a lot of people take the time to do it, or can't find a way to make one work. And there's 800 metronome apps for your phone right now.
Oh yeah. Well, working with a metronome, it's incredibly frustrating, and it never stops being that. But that's kind of the point. It's like, it's like, and I would say that every really, really good fingerstyle guitar player I've ever toured with or shared gigs with, and I've played with some fantastic people, whether it's Peter Finger, Ian Melrose, Pierre Benson, I've seen every single one of them backstage with a metronome, warming up and working with it, and it just can't be stressed enough. It is so important.
Wow. Expecting us to be both in tune and on time? I don't know.
Yeah,
Raising the
I'm
bar
afraid
pretty
so.
far.
Yeah.
Well, it's a fantastic recording.
Well, thank you.
I was going to use album.
Yeah.
I
Well, recording and album are both correct, right?
right. I would hope so. That we haven't gone that far yet, but rather than I really encourage everybody to really spend some time with what you guys have done here.
Well, thank you.
I've had it. I've been listening to it for a couple of weeks now,
Yeah.
and it is deep and yet light, and there's just great things in there.
Well,
And
thank you.
little nuggets all the time, like, oh, that little kind of roll on a couple of things really set my world on fire. And it's like, I haven't really heard that kind of interaction.
Well, thank you. And we should say that for folks who are in the Bay Area, we are doing an album release show in Berkeley at the Back Room a week from this Sunday. So it's February 9th, Sunday, February 9th. And the Back Room is a wonderful little venue. It's sort of turning into the sort of premier little acoustic guitar listening room in town for folks who can't draw enough to get into the freight, which these days is hardly anybody in the fingerstyle guitar world. So that's February 9th at the Back Room in Berkeley, and we'll play pretty much all the album and then some.
What time?
7 o'clock. Yeah.
We
And
can-
of
we can
course.
include links.
Yeah, we can send you ticket links and stuff. And we set this in our little we created a little promo video for the album, but the album streams. It's not on Bandcamp. There's no CDs, and the reason for that mostly is because there are a bunch of cover tunes, which even if we did it on Bandcamp, we'd have to license those tunes and pay money up front to do that. Whereas the streaming services, one of the nice things about the streaming services is that they deal with all the licensing right then and there. So that's what it is. So there's nothing to buy, but what we really appreciate is if people like it, if they listen to it, share it on your social media, tell people about it, listen to it, write a review. Go to the streaming services. Some of them let you write a review on there, and that's the kind of thing that we appreciate. It helps us. It makes us look good. It makes us look good to promoters and people who put on shows, and that's kind of where we're at with this whole producing an album thing. It's really hard to make money selling your music. So the kind of grassroots support is what it's all about.
Catchphrase of the 21st century: like and subscribe.
Like and surprise. Yep, that's it. But I mean, beyond that, I think this gets a little more philosophical. But I think as artists, creating a body of work is sort of independent of the how can I sell this. I mean, Doug and I are both in fortunate situations where we have other music related things that pay the bills, frankly. But creating the body of work is something that is really important to me. And I had a big gap between my two solo albums ago, Postcards, which came out in 2005, and then the Duets record, which came out in 2020. So that was already a long time. And then I put out a solo album, Test of Time, last year. And I have a little bit of sort of pent up material that I really want to get out, because it is really satisfying to get your work out. And it's different from just being able to play it and having it inside you, the material that needs to come out and be shared. And again, it comes out to having this body of work that people can view you as an artist at. And, it's nice to get the feedback. Fortunately, all the projects that I've released have gotten nice feedback and nice reviews. So I hope to keep that going.
When you sequence,
yes.
how do you sequence?
Doug, you want to talk about that a little bit?
The sequencing?
Yeah.
You mean the order of songs, basically, right?
Yeah. Order of songs.
Because you are presenting, when you present it like that, you are presenting a very unique travel adventure.
It's interesting in the age of streaming, because you don't know what order people are going to listen to these things in. Unfortunately, I mean, they can listen to the album the way we put it together and sequenced it, but people can also just stumble on individual tracks, and Spotify can just arbitrarily grab one and insert it into people's playlists, so you never know what they're going to hear. But I don't know, we spent a bit of time thinking about that. I think we both played around with what should the order of these tunes be, and the biggest thing is what's our first step forward. What do we want to put out as the first tune?
Right.
And we kicked around a couple of options on this album, and we ended up it's Lock Tenders, right?
It's Lock Tenders. Yeah, I'm looking at our list right here. And actually, we should say, if people are interested in it, if you go to tejaanddugguitar.com, there is a whole link to the liner notes for the album, and I have them right here on my iPad. And you can see the tunings and the guitars that we used, and of course the order of tunes. You do kind of want to have a little bit of an arc in there, right? So we started with Lock
to break it up. You don't want 3 tunes that are the same tempo and the same key and that kind of thing.
Right. For this album has a couple pieces where I play slide, and we didn't want those back to back. There's some baritone tunes, so you kind of try to create something that's interesting and sort of take the listener, like you said, Richard, on a little journey. I mean, I'm discovering in my old age that I'm a very different music listener than a lot of people. I don't listen to music to relax. To me, listening to music is something that's really a lot more of sort of, I hesitate to call it an intellectual activity, but I think a lot of musicians feel that way. It's like most of us can't listen to music while we work or write or something like that, right? Because we're always like, what's that progression? It's like, what, how would that melody sit in DADGAD with the capo at the 2nd fret?
So active listener. You're not a passive listener. You're just actively listening.
Exactly. And to me, that's kind of, even if I have music on, like while I'm in, I do a lot of my listening like in the kitchen while I'm cooking, kind of a thing. So it is not that I'm like sitting in my chair with the speakers directed exactly at me, paying full attention,
right.
But I'm still paying attention to the music. And it's not uncommon for me to like run to my guitar and figure something out while I have something on the stove, kind of a thing. But
you have an excuse when you overcook the broccoli.
Exactly. But yeah, I think that's, we tried, Doug mentioned, we one of the nice things about, used to be like you had to like burn multiple CDs to try to figure out a track order and try it out. Now you just put it all into your computer and you create a little different playlist and play around with it. So we did that. I mean, we tried, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 different ways. And sometimes it would just be like one tune where we switched the order. And, you want to end on something that, I don't know, maybe gives people a little pause, or it's nice to save a little bit of a surprise for the end. At the same time, a lot of people might never make it to the end, so you don't want to you don't want to put like your best piece at the end because people might not hear.
I mentioned to Richard this morning that the concept of the entire album in producing music or whatever else kind of disappeared when the CD players included a shuffle button.
Yes.
There was no shuffle on a record player.
Right.
Started putting things out on CD, people could just hit shuffle or whatever, and you lost that continuity that the musicians intended when they put it.
Yeah, but of course, with an LP, if you weren't totally drawn in, you might never flip the thing.
Yeah, I was listening to 2 things on the way coming up, and I 250,000 miles on my Prius, and it's got a CD player, and I'm so glad. You know, if the car ever had to go away, I don't know what I'd do. Because I really like to hear what the musicians think the order is. And I was listening to Supertramp's Breakfast in America.
Oh, I haven't heard that one for a while.
Which is a unbelievably sequenced record. And to me, it's special meaning because I was working in New York as an assistant engineer at the time, and we had their tapes.
Okay.
It was the first thing that I ever really got to listen to in a studio and hear, all everything, the work that they put into it. Yeah. And then and I was listening to the second Springsteen record, and boy, by the time you get to Born to Run, you're out of breath,
Right.
and you're
and it's I sort of can't believe we're talking about Supertramp here, but I do have a funny thing to say about that particular record. I grew up in Europe. That Live in Paris album that came out right after that, I think, was huge in Europe, and that was the first record that I heard as a kid that was the first Supertramp thing I heard. And then listening to the Breakfast in America album later sounded weird because the sequencing was different on it, of course, even though it was many of the same songs.
Right. It was different in the live show than it was on.
So it kind of messes with your head to hear things in like a different arrangement and a different sequence, which, I think this is why you go see live music. My whole thing with going to see live music, I'm not interested in hearing exactly what's on the record. That is something that going to see music live, especially at a roots music, small venue level, you can't duplicate that. You can watch all the YouTube videos in the world you want, but you're not getting that experience of people making decisions in real time as you're sitting there listening to it. And the optimist in me thinks that with so many things becoming AI and sort of unpredictable whether it's actually real or not, people will hopefully start craving a little bit of that thing of there are people on stage 50 feet in front of you and there's no question whether what they're doing is actually what they're doing.
Yes.
Because you don't even know if you're going to see an arena show whether anything that they're doing up there a mile away is actually what they're doing. Right. The listener experience would be no different if people are lip syncing and it's all playback or if they're actually doing it.
Yeah, especially with the quality of the sound systems.
In that environment. But if you come to the back room, A different story.
It's real when we're there. Yes.
Yes.
We will make sure that there are links on the podcast here to
Yes.
the liner notes, to everything else that we've
Yeah.
talked about. But
We'll
before
send
we,
you some links for some of these collaborations because they were really fun.
Yeah,
oh
that
yeah,
would
yeah,
that
yeah,
would that would be great.
yeah. But
Uh,
before we go, we should ask about individual projects. I mean, Teja, I know that you're involved with Peghead Nation on those rare occasions when you're not doing 100-mile bike rides.
Yeah, well, 25-mile bike rides. You know, you need to talk to John Thomas about the 100-mile bike rides.
Oh, yeah, yeah. But what else are you guys doing? I mean, is there anything other on your solo or personal careers that are worth getting people turned on to?
Doug, you want to start?
Sure. Well, so Teja has Peghead Nation, of course, and I've got a course on Peghead Nation, alternate tunings, teaching some of these ideas that we exploit on the CD and different tunings. I've got a bunch of books, starting to think about a new one this year. So I enjoy doing instructional things. I teach at some guitar camps. Got one of those coming up here shortly. I also, like Teja mentioned, the backlog. Sometime maybe a year or so ago, I made a spreadsheet of all my solo tunes that I've never recorded, and it was huge. It was 50 tunes or something that I hadn't put out. So I've been cranking through those. I think I released 17 singles last year,
Wow.
rather than trying to do an album. But along with the album that we released as our duets, I put out 17 singles, and I've still got a long list of those that I'm trying to crank through.
Now, and where are those available?
They're on all the streaming services. Yeah, you
Okay,
can find them
so
on Apple Music and
Music and all.
Spotify. Yeah.
Okay, good.
That's a nice thing, it's easy to just distribute this stuff these days.
Right.
It's easy to fly under the radar because you're not putting out an album like we are, which is one reason we wanted to do this as a package, because it's a little easier to talk about than just, I put out another single this week. But at the same time, that constant flow is kind of the new way of doing music. So we're doing that too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll have more. I mean, there's nothing like that's already in the hopper, but rest assured there'll be more Teja and Doug duo tunes in the very near future. Of course, Peghead Nation is the main thing I do day to day. I'm one of the co-founders and I'm the producer. So right now I'm sitting here in the Peghead studio where I also shoot a lot of instrument demos and we shoot our lessons. So Peghead Nation, for those folks who don't know, is a online lesson platform for the most part. We have more than 70 courses, not just for guitar, but lots of other stringed and fretted instruments. We're working with 30 plus different instructors, and I'm one of three partners. It's me, Dan Gable, and Scott Nygaard running this, and it's a very satisfying thing. We just had our 10th anniversary last November, and we're moving ahead with more courses, more artists, more gear demos, more everything. I just came from the NAMM show where I got to hang out with Richard Hoover a bit as well, which was great. So doing that, I haven't really talked about it yet, but I just may be having a solo 12-string project in the works. So we will see about that.
Wow.
That's kind of what I'm hoping to. I don't know whether I'm gonna. Well, that's my hope is to have it ready sometime later this year. But there's some hardcore practicing with the metronome to be done.
And tuning. Don't forget the tuning.
And the tuning, exactly. Well, yeah, and with the 12-string, it's the tuning thing is kind of vicious. Plus, I'm into this. When I play 12-string, and each one of my solo albums has had at least one 12-string tune on it, and I'm sort of two minds, either playing tuned down the way Leo Kottke tends to play, or tuned up to pitch. And it's sort of like I put on my Leo Kottke hat or I put on my Ralph Towner hat, depending on how I'm playing the 12-string guitar. So my last solo album, Test of Time, I'm playing John Coltrane's Naima, a solo guitar version of that. And that's tuned to pitch, but in dadgad. But I'm also playing an original of mine, a tune called Tacoma, which actually Doug and I also play as a duo. That was one of the later tunes we recorded, and that is tuned down. So I haven't quite figured out how to approach those two different types of 12-string playing under one hat in one album, but I will.
Just do it. Tune down Orkney 12-string.
Yeah. Well, the problem is I currently only own one 12-string guitar, so it involves occasional restringing. Even though my local friend Bruce Victor, who has several 12 strings, and he has loaned me guitars from time to time because it is helpful to have them back to back. So I don't know. I may have to do something to remedy this.
If you want to send out one thought to
Yes.
if you want to send out a thought, both of you guys, our thought would be that you guys continue to grow and share this gifts that you both have. You got a thought?
Well, I think both Doug and I have played solo guitar, and we've been involved in the fingerstyle guitar world for 30 some years. I consider myself really, really fortunate to have a duo partner like Doug to bounce stuff back on. I've played guitar duets with a lot of people, and it's not always as easy as it is with Doug. So we've just kind of learned. I mean, I think some of it is just that the way we happen to approach the guitar is really complementary. It's not like a forced thing. So it's very fortunate to have that and to be able to create this body of work together. So that's very cool and very lucky. I think other than that, it's we're entering dark times here for the next 4 years, and I think we need to continue making art and making the world a more enjoyable place.
Or music, absolutely.
Yep.
Cool.
Thank you guys. You've been
Thanks for having us.
more than generous with your time.
Super fun.
It is super fun. We'll make sure that we get all this compiled. You'll send us some information, and
Yep.
we'll get it compiled, and we'll probably post early next week. So that would
Sounds
be
good.
around the 2nd of February. And
Perfect.
folks, if the Super Bowl is big in your world, you can always tape it, or you can always record it and get out to the back room instead and see something live instead of that.
And I hear the Super Bowl may be all AI. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
It's hard to say.
So
Go see some real people and some real music, and you guys have a fantastic day. Thanks so much.
all right.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Yep.
Bye.
Excellent.
Be well.
Okay, is this where we actually sign off? Okay.
Yeah, we'll sign it off.
Okay.
We hope you enjoyed this installment of the Santa Cruz Coffee Break. For more music-related fun, please join the Santa Cruz Guitar Players Forum at scgcpf or santacruzguitarplayers.com. If you have any questions or possible podcast topics, please contact us. If you have a product or service that you feel would be of value to our listeners, please consider adding your support and keeping the coffee pot on. Contact us for more information. We ask that you hit the like, follow, bell, or bookmark buttons so we can keep you informed of upcoming podcast episodes. We hope you enjoyed Santa Cruz Coffee Break. Now it's time to go play your guitar.